in the shadow of death, figures in waxed coats and beaked masks moved through narrow streets. They were the plague doctors, walking into danger with a hope that was often as fragile as the lives they sought to save. This is that story. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and wax as the plague doctor approached. His beaked mask, filled with aromatic substances to ward off miasmas, cast eerie shadows on the cobblestones. Each step echoed through the narrow street, the cane tapping rhythmically against the uneven ground. Behind the glass eyes, his expression was unreadable, but the weight of his waxed coat and gloves betrayed a grim determination. The houses around him were silent, shuttered against the pestilence that lingered in every shadow. A soft knock on the door echoed in the quiet house. The plague doctor paused, cane tapping a steady rhythm against the wooden floorboards. Inside, a woman's voice whispered through the crack between door and frame, pleading for help with a child who coughed desperately behind her. The doctor's movements were methodical as he reached into his bag, pulling out vials and powders, each step a careful dance with death. His waxed coat rustled softly, the sound of inevitability. The doctor moved from house to house, his cane tapping out the rhythm of each step. Inside one home, a man coughed weakly. Outside another, a child's cry echoed through the night. Each door he approached was marked with chalk crosses, symbols of dread and despair. His waxed coat rustled softly as he walked, a whisper against the silence. The air hung heavy with the scent of herbs and wax, mingling with the faint tang of illness. The distant toll of a bell echoed through the narrow street, a mournful note that seemed to hang in the air. Inside a small room, shadows danced across whitewashed walls as the plague doctor moved with measured steps, his cane tapping out a somber rhythm. He lit a candle, its flame casting flickering light on the sickly faces of those who lay in bed. The smell of herbs and wax mingled with the musty odor of illness, creating an oppressive atmosphere that clung to every surface. The air inside the small room was heavy with the scent of lavender and pine, a futile attempt to mask the underlying stench of disease. The plague doctor moved silently, his waxed coat rustling softly as he approached the bed where a young woman lay pale and still. Her breath came in shallow gasps, each one a battle for air. He reached into his bag with gloved hands, pulling out a vial filled with murky liquid. His movements were precise, methodical, as if the very act of care could somehow turn back the tide. The gas lamps flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows along the cobblestones. The plague doctor moved through the silent street, his beaked mask a stark silhouette against the fading light. Each step was deliberate, the tapping of his cane echoing off the stone walls. Windows were shuttered tight, sealing in the sounds of suffering and despair. He paused before each chalk-marked door, his waxed coat rustling softly as he prepared to enter another home where illness awaited. The doctor's cane tapped against the stone path, a steady rhythm marking his progress through the silent street. Each door he approached bore a chalk cross, a stark symbol of dread and despair. Inside one home, a woman wept softly over her child's fevered body. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and wax, an attempt to ward off the pervasive stench of illness. His movements were precise, as if each step might turn back time itself. The night pressed in close, the gas lamps casting faint light on the cobblestones. The doctor's cane tapped out a steady rhythm as he moved from house to house. Each door bore a chalk cross, a stark symbol of dread and despair. Inside one home, a woman clutched her child tightly, eyes wide with fear. Her breath caught in shallow gasps, mingling with the faint scent of herbs and wax. The doctor approached silently, his waxed coat rustling softly as he prepared to offer what little help he could. The doctor's cane clicked against the cobblestones, each sound echoing in the quiet street. Shadows danced along the walls as he moved from door to door, each marked with chalk crosses. Inside one home, a man lay on a bed, his breath shallow and labored. Beside him, his wife whispered prayers, her eyes fixed on the doctor's gloved hands as they carefully applied a poultice. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and wax, an attempt to mask the pervasive stench of illness. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and wax, an attempt to mask the pervasive stench of illness. In one room, a young mother clung to her feverish child, eyes wide with fear. The doctor approached silently, his beaked mask a shadow in the flickering light of the gas lamp. His movements were precise, methodical, as he prepared another vial filled with murky liquid. Each step was deliberate, the tapping of his cane echoing off the stone walls, a steady rhythm marking his progress through the silent street. The doctor's cane tapped out a somber rhythm on the cobblestones, each step deliberate in the oppressive silence. Inside one home, a child coughed weakly, a sound that seemed to hang in the air like smoke. The woman beside him held her breath, eyes fixed on the figure cloaked in waxed black. His movements were precise, almost ritualistic as he prepared his tools. The beaked mask cast an eerie shadow on the walls, while the faint scent of herbs and wax mingled with the sickly sweet stench of illness. Shadows danced along the walls as the doctor moved from home to home, each door marked by chalk crosses that seemed to glow in the dim light. Inside one house, a man coughed weakly, his breath ragged. The woman beside him held her breath, eyes fixed on the figure cloaked in waxed black. His movements were precise, almost ritualistic as he prepared another vial filled with murky liquid. Each step was deliberate, the tapping of his cane echoing off the stone walls, a steady rhythm marking his progress through the silent street. The sound of the doctor's cane echoed through the narrow alley, a sharp contrast to the soft rustling of waxed fabric. Inside one home, a young girl lay still, her breath barely perceptible beneath the blankets. Her mother sat beside her, eyes red from crying, clutching a rosary tightly. The room smelled of herbs and wax, an attempt to mask the sickly scent of illness. The doctor approached quietly, his beaked mask casting long shadows in the flickering candlelight, moving with deliberate precision as he prepared another vial. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the room, where a young boy lay motionless in bed. His mother knelt beside him, her hands clasped together in silent prayer. Outside, the doctor's cane tapped against the cobblestones, each sound a reminder of his approach. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbs and wax, an attempt to mask the heavy stench of illness. The doctor entered quietly, his beaked mask casting eerie shadows on the walls as he prepared another vial filled with murky liquid. The moon hung low, casting an eerie blue light over the silent street. In one house, a young woman sat by her husband's bedside, watching his shallow breaths. The doctor entered quietly, cane tapping against cobblestones. His beaked mask cast long shadows in the flickering candlelight. He moved with deliberate precision. The doctor's cane tapped against the cobblestones, a steady beat in the quiet night. Inside a small chamber, an old woman lay on her bed, her breath shallow and uneven. Her daughter knelt beside her, clutching her hand tightly. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and wax, an attempt to mask the heavy stench of illness. The doctor moved quietly, his beaked mask casting eerie shadows in the flickering candlelight as he prepared another vial filled with murky liquid. In the dim glow of candlelight, the doctor moved through the narrow streets, cane tapping against cobblestones. Each home he approached was silent, except for the soft rustle of fabric and whispered prayers. Inside a small chamber, an elderly man lay in bed, his breath shallow and laboured. His wife sat vigil beside him, her face etched with worry. The doctor paused at the doorway, beaked mask casting eerie shadows as he prepared another vial, each drop filled with hope and despair. Sleep well, wherever you are. If this reached you tonight, subscribe and leave a comment. We read everyone. The doctor's cane tapped out a somber rhythm on the cobblestones, each sound echoing through the silent street. Inside an old stone house, a family gathered around a sick child, their faces pale in the flickering candlelight. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs and melted wax, an attempt to ward off evil spirits. The doctor entered quietly, his beaked mask casting eerie shadows on the walls as he prepared another vial filled with murky liquid, each drop a silent promise. The air inside the room was heavy with the scent of sickness and burning herbs. The doctor moved silently to the bedside, his beaked mask casting eerie shadows on the walls. Each movement was precise, as if he were a puppeteer controlling strings of hope. He prepared another vial filled with murky liquid, each drop a fragile promise in the face of despair. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, unyielding and cold. The night air clung to the narrow street like a shroud, heavy with the scent of burning herbs meant to ward off unseen terrors. Each tap of the doctor's cane echoed through the silence, a steady pulse in the face of encroaching darkness. Inside an old stone house, a woman whispered prayers as she held her husband's cold hand. The doctor approached quietly, his beaked mask casting eerie shadows on the walls, preparing another vial filled with murky liquid, each drop a silent promise to fight the inevitable. The doctor's candle flickered, casting long shadows across the sick room. A young boy lay in bed, his body frail and still. His mother sat beside him, her eyes red from weeping. Outside, the night was thick with fog, a silent sentinel watching over the quiet street. The doctor approached the bedside, each step measured and deliberate. He lifted the beaked mask, its hollow eyes fixed on the child, and prepared another vial filled with murky liquid, each drop an unspoken prayer. The doctor's cane tapped out a steady rhythm as he moved through the silent street. Inside, the small room was dimly lit by a single candle, its flame casting flickering shadows on the walls. A woman lay in bed, her breath short and rapid. Her husband sat beside her, holding her hand tightly, his eyes filled with fear. The doctor approached quietly, each step measured, his beaked mask casting eerie shadows as he prepared another vial of murky liquid, each drop a silent promise against the encroaching darkness. The silence was almost tangible as the doctor moved through the sickened town. His beaked mask hung low over his face, a symbol of both protection and isolation. Each step he took was careful, deliberate, as if he were walking through a dream. Inside an old stone house, a family huddled together, their faces pale in the flickering candlelight. The doctor approached the bedside, his movements precise, preparing another vial filled with murky liquid, each drop a silent promise against the encroaching darkness. The night was thick with the scent of burning herbs and the distant cries of the ill. In a small, dimly lit room, the doctor stood beside a woman's bed, her skin pale under the flickering candlelight. Her breaths were shallow, each one a fragile whisper against the encroaching darkness. He prepared another vial filled with murky liquid, its contents a silent promise in the face of despair. Each drop fell like a tolling bell, marking time in this quiet vigil. The doctor paused at the door, the air thick with the scent of sickness and fear. Inside, a small family gathered around a bed where a young girl lay pale and still. Her mother's voice was barely audible as she whispered prayers, her fingers clutching her husband's hand tightly. The doctor stepped forward, his cane tapping out a measured rhythm on the stone floor, each sound echoing in the quiet room. He lifted the beaked mask, its hollow eyes fixed on the girl, and prepared another vial filled with murky liquid, each drop a silent promise against the encroaching darkness. The fog clung to the cobblestones like whispers of the dead. In the pale moonlight, the doctor's waxed coat glistened with damp, each step a deliberate dance through darkness. His cane tapped out a somber rhythm on the stones, marking time in this quiet vigil. A flickering candle inside a shuttered window cast eerie shadows across the street, as if reaching out to him from beyond closed doors. Each drop of murky liquid he prepared was a silent promise against the encroaching night. The doctor's cane tapped out a slow rhythm on the wooden floorboards, each sound resonating in the stillness of the dimly lit room. A young boy lay feverish under the thin blanket, his breaths coming in short gasps that seemed to struggle against the air. His mother knelt beside him, her eyes red from tears and lack of sleep, clutching a crucifix tightly. The doctor lifted the beaked mask, its hollow gaze fixed on the child as he prepared another vial filled with murky liquid, each drop a silent promise in the face of despair. The air inside the cramped candlelit room was heavy with the scent of sweat and sickness. The doctor's waxed coat gleamed faintly in the dim light as he approached a bed where an elderly man lay, his breaths shallow and labored. The family members huddled around him, their faces etched with worry, eyes fixed on the doctor's every move. He lifted the beaked mask, its hollow gaze steady, and prepared another vial filled with murky liquid, each drop a silent promise against the encroaching darkness that seemed to press in from all sides. The doctor's waxed coat creaked as he moved through the narrow alleyways, each step deliberate in the oppressive silence. An oil lamp cast long shadows across the wet cobblestones, reflecting off his beaked mask like a spectre of death itself. Inside a shuttered house, a woman's voice rose faintly over the sound of coughing. The doctor paused, lifting his cane to knock gently on the door before preparing another vial filled with murky liquid, each drop a silent promise against the encroaching darkness. The doctor's heavy boots crunched on the frosty ground, each step a careful measure through the silent night. Inside the house, a child's cough echoed between walls lined with wooden planks, their dark grains stark against the pale moonlight filtering through tiny windows. The father sat vigil by the bed, his face gaunt and eyes sunken from lack of sleep. The doctor lifted the beaked mask, its hollow gaze steady as he prepared another vial filled with murky liquid, each drop a silent promise in the face of relentless despair. The doctor's cane tapped out a slow, mournful rhythm as he entered the house. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbs and sickness. A young girl lay in bed, her face flushed and feverish under the thin blanket. Her father knelt beside her, his hand on her forehead, eyes filled with silent pleas for any sign of hope. The doctor lifted the beaked mask, its hollow gaze steady as he prepared another vial, each drop a silent promise against the relentless grip of the plague. The sound of coughing echoed from within the shuttered homes as the doctor made his way down the street. Each step was a careful balance between light and shadow under the fading light of dusk. A faint scent of herbs lingered in the air, mingling with the acrid tang of illness. He paused before a door, where a young woman's voice called out softly, her words barely audible over the coughing. The doctor lifted his cane to knock, each tap a measured rhythm against wood that seemed to carry more weight than any word could. The doctor's shadow stretched long across the cobblestones as he approached another shuttered home. Inside, a faint light flickered from an oil lamp, casting soft shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the smell of sickness and herbs, mingling uneasily in the stale atmosphere. A young woman lay coughing in bed, her husband's worried eyes fixed on her every movement. The doctor lifted his beaked mask, its hollow gaze steady as he prepared another vial filled with murky liquid, each drop a silent promise against the encroaching darkness that seemed to press in from all sides. The doctor's waxed coat rustled softly as he stepped into the dimly lit room. A single oil lamp cast flickering shadows on the rough-hewn walls, where cobwebs clung to the corners like ghostly tendrils. Inside, a man lay prostrate on a straw mattress, his breath shallow and laboured. The doctor's beaked mask gazed down with hollow eyes as he prepared another vial filled with murky liquid, each drop a silent promise in the face of despair that seemed to seep from every pore. The doctor's presence was a solitary echo through the silent street. Each step carried the weight of hope and despair as he approached another shuttered home. Inside, the sick lay in beds, their breaths shallow against the cold night air that seeped through cracks in the walls. He paused, cane tapping out a measured rhythm before lifting his beaked mask to prepare another vial filled with murky liquid. The promise of each drop was silent, yet desperate, as he faced the encroaching darkness. The doctor's cane tapped against the cobblestones, each sound a sharp punctuation in the stillness. Inside the home, the air was thick with the pungent smell of herbs and the faint whisper of coughs. A young man lay on his bed, eyes closed, his breath shallow and ragged. His mother sat beside him, her hand trembling as she held his, a silent plea for strength in her gaze. The doctor prepared another vial, each drop a quiet promise against the encroaching shadows that threatened to consume them all. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth and burning herbs. The doctor's cane tapped out a measured rhythm on the cobblestones, each sound echoing in the silence that enveloped the shuttered homes. Inside one such house, a child coughed weakly, her body racked by illness. Her father watched from beside her bed, eyes filled with silent prayers for deliverance. The doctor lifted his beaked mask and prepared another vial of murky liquid, each drop a quiet promise against the encroaching darkness that seemed to consume everything. The doctor's footsteps were a barely perceptible whisper on the cobblestones. Inside a nearby home, a woman coughed weakly, her breaths thin and desperate. Her husband, pale and gaunt, held her hand, eyes fixed on the door where the doctor was expected to enter. Each drop of murky liquid in the vial he prepared seemed a silent pledge against the relentless encroachment of darkness that filled every corner. The flickering light of an oil lamp illuminated the sick room, casting long shadows across the rough-hewn walls. The doctor's waxed coat rustled softly as he moved, his beaked mask a silent sentinel. A woman lay on the bed, her breaths thin and ragged, eyes closed in feverish dreams. Her daughter knelt beside her, clutching her hand tightly, tears glistening in the dim light. Each drop of murky liquid from the vial was a quiet promise against the encroaching darkness that seemed to press down upon them. The doctor's cane scraped against the floor as he entered the dimly lit room. Shadows danced across the walls from the flickering candlelight, casting long tendrils of darkness that seemed to reach out and touch the sick child lying in bed. Her fevered skin was hot to the touch, and her breaths came in shallow gasps. The mother's eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, watching as the doctor prepared another vial of murky liquid. Each drop promised a glimmer of hope against the encroaching shadows that threatened to consume them all. The scent of pine tar and herbs filled the air as the doctor moved through the sick room. The oil lamp's light flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. A young boy lay on the bed, his face flushed with fever, eyes closed in a restless sleep. His mother knelt beside him, her hand on his forehead, praying silently. Each drop from the vial was a quiet act of defiance against the encroaching darkness that seemed to consume the room. The oil lamp's glow barely reached the far corners of the room, where shadows clung like a second skin. The doctor's waxed coat rustled as he moved toward the bed where a young girl lay, her breath shallow and intermittent. Her mother sat beside her, holding her hand tightly, eyes fixed on the door from which any hope might come. Each drop of liquid from the vial was a silent whisper against the encroaching darkness that seemed to suffocate them. The air was thick with the smell of herbs and pine tar as the doctor approached the bed where a woman lay, her breath shallow and uneven. Her husband knelt beside her, his eyes red from lack of sleep, clutching her hand tightly. Each drop from the vial seemed to hang in the air, a silent promise against the encroaching shadows that threatened to consume them all. The oil lamp flickered, casting eerie light across the room and deepening the sense of impending darkness. The doctor's cane tapped against the wooden floor, echoing through the quiet room. The oil lamp cast a dim glow, barely reaching the corners where shadows gathered like silent sentinels. A man lay in bed, his breath shallow and labored, eyes closed to the world beyond his fevered dreams. His wife sat beside him, her hand gently holding his, tears streaking down her face. Each drop from the vial was a whispered promise against the darkness that seemed to seep into every crevice of their lives. The night's chill seeped through the window, a thin draught that whispered across the bed where an elderly man lay. His chest rose and fell with difficulty, each breath a struggle against the encroaching darkness. The doctor moved silently, his waxed coat rustling softly as he approached. The oil lamp flickered, casting shadows that danced like spectres on the walls. Each drop from the vial was a quiet promise, a silent act of hope in the face of relentless despair. The oil lamp's light barely pierced the thick darkness that clung to the cobblestones. Each step as the doctor's cane echoed sharply, breaking the hushed tension in the air. The young girl lay motionless on her bed, breath shallow beneath a tattered blanket. Her father sat vigil by her side, eyes sunken from fear and fatigue. Each drop from the vial was a fragile promise against the relentless encroachment of shadow that seemed to close in around them. The scent of pine tar and herbs filled the air as the doctor moved through the dimly lit room. Shadows danced across the walls, cast by the flickering oil lamp. An old woman lay in bed, her breaths barely audible under the weight of her illness. Her daughter knelt beside her, clutching her hand tightly, eyes brimming with unshed tears. Each drop from the vial was a silent prayer against the encroaching darkness that seemed to close in around them. The doctor's cane tapped rhythmically against the wooden floor, a steady beat in the oppressive silence. A young boy lay feverish on his bed, eyes closed to the flickering oil lamp that cast long shadows across the room. His mother sat beside him, her face etched with worry and fatigue, holding his hand tightly. Each drop from the vial was a whispered promise against the creeping darkness that seemed to tighten its grip with every passing moment. The doctor's cane tapped against the cold stone floor as he approached the bedside. Shadows danced across the room from the flickering oil lamp, casting long, twisted shapes that seemed to writhe like living things. An old woman lay motionless beneath a tattered quilt, her breath shallow and labored. Her daughter knelt beside her, holding her hand tightly, eyes brimming with unshed tears. Each drop from the vial was a whispered promise against the creeping darkness that tightened its grip with each passing moment. The flickering oil lamp cast long shadows across the room, dancing like phantoms on the walls. A young mother lay motionless on her bed, her breaths shallow and uneven beneath a thin blanket. Her husband stood vigil by her side, his eyes hollow with fear and exhaustion. Each drop from the vial was a silent plea against the encroaching darkness that seemed to close in around them, threatening to consume all hope. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and pine tar as the doctor moved through the dimly lit room. Shadows twisted across the walls, cast by the flickering oil lamp. An elderly man lay motionless on his bed, his breaths shallow beneath a tattered quilt. His son sat vigil by his side, eyes sunken from fear and fatigue. Each drop from the vial was a fragile promise against the relentless encroachment of shadow that seemed to close in around them. The clatter of hooves faded into silence as the doctor approached another door. Inside, a child's fevered breaths filled the air, mingling with the scent of herbs and pine tar. Shadows from the flickering oil lamp cast grotesque shapes on the walls. The mother's eyes were sunken with fear, her hand clung desperately to her child's, seeking comfort in touch. Each drop from the vial was a silent prayer against the encroaching darkness that seemed to close in around them. The doctor's cane tapped against the rough wooden floor, a rhythmic echo in the silent room. A young woman lay on her bed, eyes closed, breaths shallow and irregular beneath a thin blanket. Her husband sat beside her, his hands clasped around hers, lips moving silently in prayer. Shadows from the oil lamp danced across the walls, casting grotesque shapes that seemed to rise like living things. Each drop from the vial was a whispered promise against the encroaching darkness, a fragile lifeline in the face of the relentless plague. The night air was cold and damp, seeping into the doctor's waxed coat. His beaked mask smelled faintly of herbs and camphor as he stepped through a threshold lit only by the dim glow of an oil lamp. Inside, a young girl lay in bed, her breath short and sharp beneath a patchwork quilt. Her father sat beside her, eyes fixed on the doctor's every move. Each drop from the vial was a desperate whisper against the encroaching darkness that seemed to tighten its grip with each passing moment. The torchlight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the stone walls adorned with tapestries. The doctor's cane clicked on the rough floor as he moved down the corridor, his beaked mask faintly scented with herbs and camphor. At a closed door, a woman waited, her hand clutching the latch, eyes filled with silent pleading. Each step brought him closer to another soul gripped by fear and uncertainty. Each drop from the vial a fragile promise against the encroaching darkness. The sound of a cough echoed through the room, sharp and urgent against the silence. The doctor's beaked mask smelled faintly of camphor as he approached the bed where an elderly woman lay, her breaths ragged beneath a faded blanket. Shadows from the oil lamp danced across her gaunt face, casting deep crevices that seemed to swallow light. Her daughter knelt beside her, tears streaming down her cheeks, clutching at the doctor's arm with desperate eyes. Each drop from the vial was a fragile whisper against the encroaching darkness. The doctor's cane tapped rhythmically against the floor, each sound a solitary beat in the oppressive silence. Inside the room, a young man tossed restlessly on his cot, sweat beading on his brow under the dim glow of an oil lamp. His mother hovered nearby, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, clutching a handkerchief to her nose and mouth. The air was thick with the scent of pine tar and herbs, mingling with the underlying stench of illness. Each drop from the vial was a fragile hope against the creeping darkness. The night was thick with the scent of smoke and decay as the doctor moved through the narrow streets. His waxed coat clung to his form, the beaked mask a silent sentinel on his face. Each step echoed in the quiet, the cane tapping out a mournful rhythm against the cobblestones. Shadows loomed large around him, shapes shifting in the flickering light of an oil lamp. The doctor knew little could be done for those he visited, yet he pressed on, each vial a desperate whisper against the encroaching darkness. The oil lamp's flickering light revealed the sick room's shadows, deep and foreboding. The doctor paused at the threshold, his waxed coat rustling softly as he adjusted his beaked mask. Inside, a man lay on a narrow bed, his chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. His wife clutched his hand, her face a mask of silent agony. Each drop from the vial was a fragile promise against the encroaching darkness that seemed to tighten its grip with each passing moment. The door creaked open, revealing a room draped in shadows. An oil lamp flickered weakly, casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. A young girl lay on a bed, her small frame barely visible beneath a thin blanket. Her mother sat by her side, eyes red and hollow from constant vigilance. The doctor stepped closer, his waxed coat rustling quietly against the chill air. Each drop from the vial was a fragile promise in the face of an encroaching darkness that seemed to grow more insistent with each passing moment. The doctor paused at the threshold of a cramped sick room, his waxed coat cool to the touch in the chill air. An oil lamp cast weak light across the scene, revealing a gaunt man lying on a straw mattress, his breathing shallow and labored. His wife knelt by his side, her face etched with worry. The room smelled of sweat and herbs, each vial's drop a fragile whisper against the relentless darkness. The doctor's cane tapped against the cold stone floor, echoing in the narrow corridor. He stepped into a small room where an oil lamp cast feeble light on the sick child's pale face. The mother knelt beside the bed, her hands clasped tightly together. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and sweat, each drop from the vial a fragile hope against the encroaching darkness that seemed to tighten its grip with every breath. The sick room's air was thick with the acrid scent of herbs and sweat. Shadows danced along the walls as the oil lamp flickered weakly, casting an eerie glow over the scene. A woman lay on a narrow bed, her breaths short and rapid. Her husband sat by her side, his eyes fixed on the doctor's every move. The waxed coat rustled softly with each step the doctor took towards the bedside, where each drop from the vial offered a fragile hope against the relentless darkness. The old wooden floor creaked underfoot as the doctor moved closer to the bed. An oil lamp flickered weakly, casting long shadows that danced across the sick room's walls. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and sweat, each vial's drop a fragile hope against the encroaching darkness. The old man lay motionless on the thin blanket, his breath shallow and barely perceptible beneath the rustling waxed coat of the doctor. His wife knelt by his side, her eyes fixed on the flickering light, silently pleading for a miracle. The doctor's beaked mask cast an eerie silhouette against the flickering oil lamp, its shadows dancing across the rough-hewn walls of the sick room. A young boy lay on a thin mattress, his small frame barely moving with each breath. His mother sat by his side, her eyes fixed on the doctor as he approached, each step muffled by the waxed coat that seemed to shield him from the encroaching darkness.